So in this first video for our series on textures, we are going to start by assigning a material to our object. So your scene might have multiple objects in it, or it might have an object that is quite a bit more complicated than this. That's fine. I just want to be clear that texturing is a process that happens after you are completely done modeling. Your model should be 100% finished, you feel confident in it, and you want to move on to the next step of adding textures. So you have your kind of base silhouette finished, and now we're going to add textures to it. So I'm going to start with the cube because that's easiest to work with, and then I'm going to do a more complex shape later. So I have the cube selected, and what I need to do is assign it a new material. If you remember back in our video on the different editors, the attribute editor has a bunch of different nodes in it, and one of those nodes is called Lambert1. This is the material node that's assigned by default, and Lambert is a type of shader, which basically means it's kind of how light reacts to a surface. And Lambert's this very kind of plain matte surface is what we're seeing right here. I'm going to be changing that to a different type of shader that's going to reflect very closely to what we will see in Unity. That's called the Stingray shader. So Lambert is just not, it's a very outdated shader, it's just not very useful for us. So the first thing I need to do, I'm just showing you here in the menu that Lambert1 exists and it's currently assigned, and that's the default shader. I'm going to assign a new material to my object. So I'm going to right click my object. If I just hold right click on my object, I can go down to assign new material. This is the way that I like to do it. I think this is the most efficient way. So I hit that assign new material and it opens up this window that has a bunch of different options on the side and different materials that will appear as we click through these. So I'm going to click surface under the Maya options. If you don't see the Maya options, just twirl that down. And under surface, there's one called Stingray PBS. That stands for Stingray Physically Based Shader. So this one reflects the real world very accurately, but more importantly, it's almost exactly the same shader that's used in the Unity game editor. So things that we make in Maya are going to look like they will once we get into Unity. So I'm going to click the Stingray PBS right here, and now it has assigned that node to our model. I'm going to click off of our model and click back on it just to show you that. So we have those same nodes that we saw before, but rather than Lambert1, we have one called Stingray PBS1. And if I click on that node, that's how I access its information. So I've assigned a new material. I'm going to immediately give it a name, and it's good to give it a useful name. So I'm going to call this cube material, and I'll give it a number at the end, 1. So you'll notice though that my model doesn't look any different. My viewport looks the same, and that's because I haven't turned on what's called hardware rendering, which basically allows us to use our computer's graphics card to view our models. By default, all models are going to look the same. They'll look like this flat gray. So let's turn on that hardware texturing by going down to shading and clicking hardware texturing. So just to do that one more time, shading, hardware texturing. If I click that, it will turn it on, and now I can see a little sun reflection in this surface. So my cube material 1 surface is now properly applied. I'm in the Stingray shader, and now we're ready to move on and work with that shader.